St. Luke's Hospital in Seattle was a place where order reigned supreme. Each hallway, with its polished linoleum floors and muted lighting, seemed almost to swallow sound, creating an atmosphere of quiet urgency. It was a place where every second mattered, and every action had a purpose. Nurses, dressed in light blue scrubs, moved through the corridors with a practiced ease, their expressions a blend of focus and compassion as they attended to the endless list of patient needs. Doctors, wearing pristine white coats, were absorbed in a steady rhythm of patient checkups, emergency calls, and critical decision-making. The hospital was more than just a collection of rooms and machinery. It was a tightly woven community where each member of the staff played a critical role in the patient's journeys. Despite the intensity of the environment, a strange calm permeated St. Luke's. The quiet hum of medical equipment, the gentle beep of heart monitors, and the occasional sound of a nurse's footsteps were almost meditative, providing a kind of background reassurance to everyone within those walls. Jennifer Ellis, the head nurse on the pediatric floor, was a woman who had spent nearly 2 decades caring for others. At 45, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen almost everything the job could throw at her. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical low bun, highlighting the fine lines around her eyes that had formed from years of smiles and the occasional tear. Known for her warmth and a no-nonsense attitude, Jennifer was beloved by both her colleagues and patients' families. St. Luke's was like a second home to Jennifer. She had been working here since she was fresh out of nursing school, watching the hospital grow, the staff change, and countless families come and go. Despite the institutional feel of the place, she knew every corner of this building, and in a way, she felt it knew her too. The long corridors, the cold metal of the doorknobs, and even the hum of the air conditioning system had become familiar, comforting presences in her life. But that comfort came with its share of emotional weight. Working in pediatrics, Jennifer was no stranger to heartbreak. The children who filled these rooms often fought battles most adults couldn't fathom, and their families experienced a kind of pain that could not be easily expressed. Jennifer had long ago accepted that there were times when her best efforts wouldn't be enough, but it never stopped her from pouring her heart into each patient. That morning, as she moved through the floor conducting her usual checks, she sensed that something felt different. It was the kind of feeling that years of experience had taught her to trust. She walked briskly to the nurse's station, scanning through patient charts with her practiced eye. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but a strange unease lingered. As Jennifer went through her routine, she noticed one of the newer residents, Dr. Luke Harris, heading toward her. Luke was fresh out of med school, and his boyish face still held a spark of idealism that Jennifer both respected and quietly envied. He approached her with a friendly nod, his dark eyes bright with the eagerness of a young doctor who hadn't yet become jaded by the challenges of hospital life. "Morning, Jen," he greeted her, leaning against the counter. "Anything out of the ordinary today?" Jennifer shook her head, though she couldn't shake the strange feeling. "Nothing unusual. Just a quiet day, I suppose," she replied, her eyes drifting toward the hallway as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Luke noticed her glance and raised an eyebrow. "Quiet is good," he said with a smile. "Means we're doing our job, right?" Jennifer chuckled, but the uneasy feeling remained. "Right. Quiet is good," she echoed, though the words felt hollow. As the morning wore on, the usual routine continued. Doctors made rounds, families visited, and nurses coordinated care. Jennifer felt herself slipping into the familiar rhythm, her earlier sense of unease beginning to fade. She was reviewing a set of medication orders when a soft murmur in the hallway caught her attention. At first, she dismissed it as the low hum of conversation, but as it grew louder, she sensed that something was off. She glanced down the hall and saw nurses gathered, whispering among themselves with looks of confusion and surprise. Curious, she set the chart aside and walked over to investigate. As she drew closer, she noticed a figure moving through the hallway. A golden retriever, his gait calm and purposeful. He was a handsome dog, with a shiny, golden coat that gleamed under the hospital's fluorescent lights. What was unusual wasn't just that a dog was in the hospital. It was that he was moving as if he belonged there. Jennifer's brow furrowed as she watched the dog stride past the nurses, ignoring their outstretched hands and curious voices. He walked with an almost regal composure, his eyes fixed straight ahead as though he had a destination in mind. Luke appeared at her side, following her gaze. "Is that a dog?" he asked, disbelief lacing his voice. "Apparently," Jennifer replied, watching the dog with a mixture of surprise and fascination. Pets were strictly prohibited in the hospital, but this dog didn't seem to care about rules. He moved with such calm assurance that, for a moment, she felt as if he belonged there as much as any of the staff. "We should probably stop him," Luke suggested, though there was a hint of hesitation in his voice. Jennifer nodded, but something made her pause. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about the dog's determined walk, his calm demeanor, that kept her rooted to the spot. It was as if the dog had some silent permission, an unspoken understanding that he was needed here. After a moment, she looked at Luke, her voice soft but resolute. "Let's see where he's going." They exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of their decision. Together, they followed the golden retriever as he continued down the hallway, unaware of the ripple he had caused in the calm, controlled world of St. Luke's. Jennifer and Luke moved quietly behind the golden retriever as he continued his steady walk through the hospital corridors. The usual rhythm of St. Luke's had been broken, and they could feel the curious gazes of other staff members and visitors following them as they walked. Jennifer's mind raced, trying to piece together why this dog seemed so intent on being here, in this place where no pet was allowed. The golden retriever, who now seemed to be called Max, as Jennifer read from the engraved collar tag that glinted under the fluorescent lights, kept his head forward, ignoring the humans around him. His fur was soft and golden, and his eyes held a strange, gentle intensity, as if he were a messenger with an urgent yet comforting purpose. He moved with a quiet determination that made him seem almost otherworldly, and Jennifer found herself strangely drawn to his presence. "Where do you think he's headed?" Luke asked, his voice low as he kept pace beside her. "I don't know," Jennifer murmured, her eyes fixed on the dog. "But he seems to know." The staff in the pediatric ward watched in quiet fascination as Max walked past each room, pausing only briefly before continuing. It was as if he was searching for something, someone. Jennifer noticed the way he would occasionally glance up at the room numbers, almost as if he were reading them. She and Luke shared a bewildered look, both sensing that something unusual was unfolding before them. Finally, Max stopped in front of room 405. Jennifer's breath caught as she recognized the room number. Inside, a small boy named Ethan lay, hooked up to various machines that monitored his fragile state. Ethan was just 2 years old and had been in the hospital for weeks, fighting a relentless illness that left him weak and barely responsive. His young mother, Claire, rarely left his side, her eyes dark-circled from sleepless nights and endless worry. Jennifer hesitated. She knew the rules. Pets weren't allowed in patient rooms, and yet something about Max's presence felt necessary. Luke, too, seemed caught up in the moment, his usual logical demeanor softened by a sense of wonder. "We should probably not let him in," Luke said, though his voice was uncertain. "It's against hospital policy." Jennifer took a deep breath, glancing down at Max, who looked up at her with a calm, expectant gaze. "Sometimes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are exceptions to the rules." She placed her hand on the door handle, pausing for a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the room was dim, with only the soft beeps of the monitoring equipment breaking the silence. Claire was seated by her son's bedside, her fingers gently stroking his tiny hand. She looked up in surprise as the door opened, her weary eyes widening as she saw the golden retriever standing there beside Jennifer and Luke. "Oh, my," Claire murmured, a look of surprise and confusion crossing her face. "Is that a dog?" Jennifer quickly stepped in, trying to explain. "I'm so sorry, Claire. He just walked in here. We tried to stop him, but he seemed to want to come to this room." Claire looked at Max, who now stood silently, his gaze fixed on Ethan. To Jennifer's surprise, Claire's expression softened, and her lips curled into a small smile. "It's all right," she said softly, a hint of wonder in her voice. He seems gentle." Max moved closer, his movements slow and unhurried. as if he understood the need for caution in this fragile place. He sat down beside the bed and laid his head on the edge, his eyes never leaving Ethan's small, pale face. For a long moment, the room was silent. Claire looked from her son to the dog, a mixture of disbelief and hope flickering in her tired eyes. "He hasn't opened his eyes in days," Claire whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "The doctors, they're not sure if he even knows I'm here anymore." Jennifer's heart tightened as she watched Claire's gaze soften, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on Max's head. She couldn't quite explain it, but in that moment, Max seemed to bring a sense of peace into the room, as if his mere presence was enough to lift some of the weight that had been pressing down on everyone. "He just came here?" Claire asked, looking up at Jennifer and Luke, her eyes wide. Jennifer nodded, feeling a strange emotion rise within her. "He did. Walked right down the hall like he knew exactly where he was going." Luke, still standing by the door, rubbed the back of his neck, looking both amazed and puzzled. "I don't think I've ever seen anything like this," he admitted quietly. "It's almost like he knew." The three adults fell into a soft silence, each wrapped in their own thoughts. Max remained by Ethan's bedside, his head resting on the edge of the bed, his warm brown eyes filled with a gentle patience. He seemed to know, somehow, that he was needed here, that his presence mattered. In that quiet room, with only the hum of machines and the soft breathing of those present, there was a shift. Jennifer felt it, a subtle but profound change in the atmosphere. The heaviness that usually filled Ethan's room seemed to lighten, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. For the first time in weeks, Claire allowed herself to believe that something miraculous, or at least deeply meaningful, might be happening. She looked down at her son, her fingers gently brushing his hand, and whispered, "Maybe you can feel him, sweetheart. Maybe he's here just for you." Luke glanced at Jennifer, a flicker of emotion in his eyes. "I think he just might be," he murmured, almost to himself. In that moment, rules and policies felt irrelevant. What mattered was the warmth that Max had brought with him, a quiet, unspoken promise of comfort and peace. Max settled himself comfortably beside Ethan's bed, his golden fur soft and warm against the coolness of the hospital sheets. Claire looked at him, captivated by the calmness radiating from the dog, a calmness that seemed to wash over her as well. She hadn't felt peace in weeks. Every day was a relentless cycle of worry, exhaustion, and fear for her little boy. But now, with Max by Ethan's side, the air felt lighter, almost as if a small bit of sunlight had slipped through the hospital walls. Jennifer, still standing nearby, felt a similar shift. She wasn't a woman who typically believed in miracles. After years in the medical field, she learned to rely on science, protocols, and experience. And yet, seeing Max settle so naturally beside Ethan, as though he belonged there, as though he had come with purpose, made her question things she hadn't considered in a long time. Claire looked up at Jennifer, her voice soft. Do you think he understands? That Ethan needs him?" Jennifer nodded slowly, feeling a lump in her throat that surprised her. "I don't know, Claire, but I think maybe he does." Luke, still lingering by the door, let out a quiet breath, as if he'd been holding it the entire time. "It's incredible, honestly. I've never seen anything like this." He shifted slightly, his professional mask slipping as he allowed himself a rare moment of wonder. "This dog just walked in here, past security, through hallways, straight to this room. It's almost as if he knew." Claire reached out and touched Max's head, her fingers brushing through his fur. "It's like he came just for Ethan, like he somehow knew he needed him." Max seemed to sense her gentle touch and turned his head, meeting Claire's gaze with those soulful brown eyes. She felt a surge of warmth, almost as if Max was comforting her, too, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone, that somehow, things would be all right. The longer she looked into his eyes, the more she felt her anxiety melt away, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. As they all stood there, captivated by Max's quiet presence, Ethan's tiny hand moved, his fingers twitching slightly. Claire's eyes widened, and she gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Did you see that?" she whispered. looking from Jennifer to Luke with a mixture of hope and disbelief. He moved. Jennifer's eyes locked onto Ethan's hand, watching intently as his fingers twitched again, this time a little stronger. She glanced over at Luke, who was equally transfixed, his usual clinical detachment nowhere to be seen. He looked almost as stunned as Claire, his eyes wide with astonishment. That's incredible," Luke murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "He hasn't moved like that in days, has he?" Claire shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, he hasn't," she whispered, reaching down to touch her son's hand. "Oh, Ethan, can you hear us, sweetheart? Can you feel that Max is here with you?" For a moment, there was only silence. Ethan's breathing, which had been shallow and irregular, seemed to grow steadier, more rhythmic. His face, pale and drawn, appeared to relax slightly, his features softening in a way they hadn't in weeks. It was as if the tension in his small body was releasing, bit by bit, under Max's watchful presence. Jennifer felt a lump rise in her throat again. She glanced at Luke, who was wiping at his eyes, a subtle but unmistakable gesture that showed he was as moved as she was. They both knew that what they were witnessing didn't fit neatly into medical explanations or standard protocols. This was something else, something they couldn't explain but could only feel. Claire looked back at Jennifer, her voice trembling. Do you think he's getting better?" Jennifer hesitated, wanting to offer comfort without giving false hope. "I think," she said softly, choosing her words carefully, "that Max is giving him something we can't. And that's what Ethan needs right now." As they continued to watch, Max remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on Ethan with a gentle, unflinching intensity. He seemed almost protective, as if he were guarding Ethan from something unseen. His calmness was contagious, filling the room with a profound sense of tranquility that was rare in a place filled with pain and struggle. For the first time since Ethan had been admitted, Claire felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile, precious feeling she'd been too afraid to hold on to before. She leaned forward, resting her head close to Ethan's, her fingers gently stroking his tiny hand. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here." Jennifer and Luke shared a look, each of them feeling a deep respect for the moment unfolding before them. In all their years of training and experience, they had learned to see patients through the lens of symptoms and diagnoses. But now, something beyond science was happening, something that brought them back to the core of why they had entered the medical field: to help, to heal, and, at times, to witness miracles. Max's presence was a reminder that sometimes, healing didn't come from medicine alone. It could come in unexpected forms, in small acts of compassion, and, sometimes, in the gentle touch of a golden retriever with a heart full of quiet courage. The hours passed slowly, and though the doctors and nurses moved around them, it was as if the world had paused within the walls of room 405. Max never left Ethan's side, his head resting on the bed, his eyes half closed but always alert. Claire stayed with them, her heart clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, her son would come back to her. And as the afternoon sun cast a soft glow through the small hospital window, Jennifer realized that Max had given them something invaluable: a renewed belief in the power of presence, a quiet reminder that sometimes love itself was a kind of medicine. As the soft glow of the afternoon sun began to fade, the quiet in room 405 grew deeper, more profound. Max remained still, his head resting beside Ethan's tiny hand. His calm presence seemed to create a bubble of peace in the room, something tangible that each person felt deeply but couldn't fully articulate. Claire sat beside her son, her hand gently on his, while Jennifer and Luke hovered nearby, unable to pull themselves away from this scene that was unlike anything they had ever encountered. As evening settled in, Ethan stirred again. His hand moved, this time more deliberately, his fingers brushing against Max's golden fur. Claire's breath caught, and she leaned in close, her eyes wide with hope. "Ethan, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the room held onto each word, hanging on her every syllable. Ethan's eyelids fluttered, and for a heart-stopping moment, he opened them, his gaze unfocused yet serene. Claire felt a rush of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke to him softly, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and joy. "Oh, Ethan, I'm here, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Jennifer and Luke exchanged a glance, both deeply moved. Luke, who had grown accustomed to the clinical detachment of medical practice, felt something shift inside him as he witnessed this moment. He had been taught to rely on the science, to trust in medications and protocols, but this was different. It felt as if he were witnessing something raw and sacred. Ethan's gaze drifted to Max, and a faint smile touched his lips. His tiny hand moved slowly, his fingers brushing against the dog's fur in a gentle, almost reverent gesture. Max, as if sensing Ethan's fragile state, lifted his head slightly, his warm brown eyes meeting Ethan's gaze with an unspoken understanding. It was a look of pure connection, of loyalty and love, as if Max was assuring Ethan that he would stay by his side for as long as he was needed. Did he just smile?" Claire asked, her voice breaking with emotion as she looked up at Jennifer, her eyes filled with a hope so fierce it was almost painful. Jennifer nodded, swallowing back her own tears. "Yes, Claire, he did." She placed a gentle hand on Claire's shoulder, steadying her. "I've never seen anything quite like this." Luke moved closer to Ethan's bedside, his professional demeanor softened by the sheer humanity of the moment. "Claire," he began, his voice gentle yet filled with the wonder he was feeling. "Whatever Max is doing, it's making a difference. Ethan's responding to him in a way that he hasn't responded to anything else." Claire nodded, unable to tear her gaze away from her son. "It's like he knows Max is here for him." She gently stroked Ethan's hair, her voice thick with emotion. "My sweet boy, I've been waiting so long to see you open those eyes again." Jennifer, watching this unfold, found herself questioning the boundaries she'd always believed in. Her career had been built on structure, on strict adherence to the rules and routines of hospital life. But now, she was beginning to see that healing wasn't always about medicine alone. Sometimes it was about connection, about presence, about a quiet, unspoken love that could bridge the gap between life and loss. Max continued to lie beside Ethan, his presence unwavering, his loyalty undeniable. The golden retriever's calm demeanor seemed to act as a balm, not just for Ethan, but for everyone in the room. Claire felt her own anxiety begin to dissolve, replaced by a tentative but powerful sense of hope. She looked at Jennifer, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you for letting him stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jennifer nodded, smiling softly. "I think we all needed him here, Claire." As the hours slipped by, the hospital staff moved quietly around them, respecting the fragile tranquility of room 405. Occasionally, a nurse would peek in, her expression a mix of curiosity and reverence, but no one dared to disrupt the peace that Max had brought with him. The golden retriever had become a silent guardian, his presence transforming the room into a sanctuary of sorts, a place where hope could grow. At one point, Dr. Thompson, the head physician, stepped in, alerted by whispers from the staff. His usual expression of authority softened as he took in the scene before him. Max, lying beside Ethan with a quiet vigilance, Ethan's hand resting on the dog's fur, and Claire, holding onto her son with a renewed sense of strength. Dr. Thompson was a man of science, a firm believer in protocols and procedures, yet even he couldn't deny the profound effect Max seemed to be having on Ethan. He turned to Jennifer, his voice low. "I never thought I'd see anything like this in my career." Jennifer nodded, her expression thoughtful. "None of us did. But whatever's happening here, it feels real, and it's helping him. I've never seen Ethan so at peace." Dr. Thompson glanced at Max, then back at Ethan. "If it brings comfort, then perhaps we're witnessing something beyond what we can fully understand." The hours continued to pass in a soft, steady rhythm, and as night fell, a subtle but profound change took place. Ethan's breathing, which had been shallow and labored, grew steadier, more rhythmic. His heart rate, monitored carefully by the machines, showed a small but undeniable improvement. Jennifer, Luke, and Dr. Thompson exchanged hopeful glances, their skepticism gradually replaced by a cautious optimism. Claire, still seated beside her son, looked up at Max with tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, stroking his fur. "Thank you for being here with him." Max looked back at her, his gaze calm and full of understanding, as if he truly grasped the depth of her gratitude. It was a look that held a silent promise that he would stay by Ethan's side, offering comfort and strength for as long as he was needed. As midnight approached, the hospital grew quiet, the usual activity winding down to a hushed lull. But in room 405, a quiet transformation had taken place, one that couldn't be measured by machines or explained by medical textbooks. It was a change that had been brought about by a golden retriever with a heart full of quiet compassion, a reminder that sometimes healing was found not in medicine, but in the simple, unconditional presence of a friend. Jennifer, Luke, and Dr. Thompson stood together, each of them feeling a mixture of awe and humility. They had been trained to save lives, to heal through science, yet here they stood, witnesses to a kind of healing that defied explanation. As they left the room, Jennifer turned to take one last look at Max and Ethan, her heart full of gratitude and reverence. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of wonder she hadn't known she'd lost. As dawn's first light seeped through the small window in room 405, Claire found herself watching Ethan's face, her heart swelling with a sense of hope she hadn't dared to feel before. Ethan's hand remained gently resting on Max's fur, and his breathing, once strained and shallow, now moved with a steady rhythm. She hadn't closed her eyes all night, too afraid that if she looked away, this fragile piece would vanish. Jennifer returned to the room early that morning, her expression softened by the sight before her. She approached Claire, who was sitting in a chair beside Ethan's bed, her fingers still brushing against her son's small hand. "Claire," Jennifer said quietly, not wanting to disturb the calm in the room. "How's he doing?" Claire turned to her, a faint but real smile on her lips. "He's different. I can't explain it, but it's like he's resting for the first time in weeks. Max hasn't left his side once." Jennifer looked down at Max, who, upon hearing his name, lifted his head slightly, his eyes steady and warm as they met hers. She reached down and stroked his fur, feeling a surge of affection for the dog who had changed everything. "He's a special one," Jennifer murmured, feeling a strange sense of gratitude for this golden retriever who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "He seems to understand Ethan, you?" Claire nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't know how or why, but it feels like he's given us a miracle." She hesitated, her voice trembling. I was starting to prepare myself for the worst. But now," Jennifer squeezed Claire's shoulder gently. "Hold on to that hope, Claire. Sometimes, hope is all we have, and sometimes it's enough." A quiet knock on the door interrupted them, and Dr. Thompson entered, looking both curious and impressed. He nodded at Max with a slight smile before turning his attention to Ethan's chart. "Well, it seems we have a young fighter here," he said, his tone both professional and warm. "Ethan's vitals have improved overnight. It's a small change, but considering where he was yesterday," he glanced over at Max, chuckling softly. "I'm starting to wonder if we should add Max to the staff." Claire laughed quietly, a sound that surprised even her. "If he keeps this up, I'd say he's earned his place here." Dr. Thompson looked at Ethan, then at Claire, his expression softening. "I don't want to give false hope, Claire, but seeing this improvement, it's encouraging. Sometimes the presence of someone, or something, can make all the difference." Max, as if sensing his importance in the room, gently nudged Ethan's hand with his nose, eliciting a tiny sigh from the boy. Claire's heart swelled with love and hope, and she gently brushed a lock of hair from her son's forehead. "Thank you," she whispered. Looking down at Max, "Thank you for giving me my son back." Later that morning, Jennifer and Luke took a short break, standing outside the room as they absorbed everything they had witnessed. Luke, who had once believed strictly in the scientific process, found himself struggling to put into words the awe he felt. "I don't know what to make of all this," he admitted, glancing at Jennifer. "In med school, they don't teach us about this kind of healing? Jennifer nodded, her gaze distant as she reflected on the past 24 hours. Sometimes, healing isn't just about medicine, she replied. Sometimes, it's about what the patient feels, about what they need in their heart. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Max gave Ethan something none of us could, and he gave Claire hope and a reminder that love and connection can make a difference. Luke looked down, a faint smile on his lips. I think I'm learning something from Max, too. They shared a quiet moment, feeling a newfound respect for the unexplainable side of healing. When they returned to room 405, Max was still there, faithfully watching over Ethan with an unwavering devotion. The hospital staff, who had heard whispers of the miracle dog, occasionally stopped by, peeking in with a mixture of curiosity and awe. Max's presence had become a symbol, a reminder that compassion sometimes took unexpected forms. By the end of the day, Ethan's progress, though gradual, was undeniable. His breathing remained steady, his color had improved, and he seemed more at peace than he had in weeks. Max continued to lie beside him, his calm presence unchanging. For Claire, the sight of her son slowly returning to health filled her with a gratitude she couldn't put into words. One evening, as Jennifer checked on Ethan, Claire turned to her, a question lingering in her eyes. Do you think Max will stay? That he'll be here until Ethan's fully better? Jennifer hesitated, her own feelings conflicted. I don't know, Claire. I wish I could say yes, but Max, he's a mystery to all of us. She smiled softly, placing a reassuring hand on Claire's arm. But I think he'll stay as long as he's needed. He seems to know what Ethan needs, and I don't think he'd leave until he's ready. In the days that followed, Ethan's condition continued to improve. Max never left his side, and each day, he seemed to bring a little more light into room 405. His quiet, gentle presence reminded everyone who entered that sometimes, healing required more than medicine. It required love, connection, and a willingness to believe in something greater than themselves. Jennifer, Luke, and the rest of the staff watched in awe as Ethan's strength grew day by day. They witnessed the profound impact Max had, not only on Ethan but on everyone around him. Max had somehow restored hope in a place that often saw too much sorrow, and his legacy became a testament to the power of compassion. One morning, as Ethan lay resting peacefully, Claire noticed Max lift his head, his gaze meeting hers with a calm, knowing look. She sensed that he was saying goodbye, his mission completed. She reached out, her hand trembling, and gently stroked his fur. Thank you, Max, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You gave us so much more than I could ever say. With one last look at Ethan, Max rose, his golden fur shining in the morning light. He left the room quietly, moving down the corridor with the same calm grace with which he'd entered. The hospital staff watched in respectful silence as he walked out, each of them feeling the weight of his departure. Jennifer and Luke stood together, watching as Max disappeared through the doors, their hearts full of gratitude and a strange, bittersweet ache. Max had come into their lives like a quiet miracle, leaving behind a legacy of love and healing. And though he was gone, his memory lived on in room 405, in the lives of those he'd touched, and in the hearts of the people who would never forget the golden retriever who had, in his own gentle way, saved a life. In the days following Max's departure, the hospital felt different. Ethan's room, once a place of tension and uncertainty, now carried a quiet warmth. The staff at St. Luke's continued their work as they always had, but those who had been present during Max's stay couldn't shake the memory of the golden retriever who had walked in so quietly and left such a profound impact. Ethan continued to improve steadily, his strength returning more each day. Jennifer would often stop by, checking his vitals and chatting with Claire, who now carried an unmistakable sense of peace. Claire, too, seemed to be healing, her spirit rekindled by the hope Max had brought. She no longer looked weary and defeated, but had instead found a sense of purpose in supporting her son through his recovery. One afternoon, as Jennifer made her rounds, she stopped by room 405 to find Claire tidying up a small stack of get-well cards and toys left by friends and family. She looked up with a warm smile as Jennifer entered. "Hi, Jennifer," Claire greeted, her voice light and full of gratitude. "Ethan's doing so much better. I can hardly believe how much he's changed." Jennifer smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at the boy resting peacefully in his bed. "He's a fighter, Claire, and I think he had a little help along the way." She gestured to the small picture frame on the bedside table, where Claire had placed a photograph of Max that one of the nurses had taken. It had become a cherished memento, a reminder of the dog who had given them hope. Claire touched the frame, her fingers brushing over Max's gentle face. "I owe him so much. We both do." She paused, looking at Jennifer with an intensity that surprised her. "I know it sounds strange, but I feel like he was sent to us. Like he knew we needed him." Jennifer nodded, understanding exactly what Claire meant. "You're not alone in feeling that way. I think everyone on this floor felt something shift when Max was here. He gave us all a reminder of what we're here to do." As they spoke, Luke appeared at the door, leaning against the frame with a casual smile. He had grown close to both Jennifer and Claire over the past few weeks. The three of them bonded by their shared experience with Max and the transformation they had witnessed in Ethan. "Hey," Luke said, stepping inside. "How's the little guy doing today?" Claire beamed. "He's doing great. He's even starting to sit up on his own again." Her face shone with pride, her earlier sorrow replaced by a newfound resilience. Luke chuckled, crossing his arms. "I think he's got a bit of that golden retriever's spirit in him now, determined and resilient." They all laughed softly, each of them knowing that Max's influence would forever remain a part of Ethan's story. Jennifer felt a pang of bittersweet emotion as she recalled the golden retriever's last moments at the hospital, his quiet exit as though he knew his job was done. Over the following weeks, Ethan's progress became a small but celebrated story within St. Luke's. Nurses and doctors would stop by to check on him, offering smiles and small gifts, each visit a testament to the effect Max had left behind. Even the hospital's administration, typically focused on policies and procedures, found themselves acknowledging the strange but beautiful impact of the miracle dog who had made an exception in their no-pet policy. Word of Max's story spread, touching the lives of other families who found themselves in similar situations, facing moments of uncertainty and fear. Claire often shared her experience with other parents she met in the hospital, telling them of the quiet strength Max had brought into her life and encouraging them to find hope even in the darkest moments. One evening, as the sun began to set over Seattle, Jennifer found herself wandering the hospital's quiet hallways, her mind drifting back to Max. She thought of all the children and families she had cared for over the years, of the lives she had seen touched by moments of compassion and courage. Max had reminded her of the deeper purpose behind her work, the kind of healing that went beyond medications and procedures, the kind that reached into the heart. She paused by the hospital's entrance, gazing out at the twilight sky. In that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not only for Max but for the people she worked with, the families she cared for, and the small miracles that sometimes came quietly, without explanation. As she stood there, Luke joined her, his hands in his pockets, a soft smile on his face. They stood in comfortable silence, both of them reflecting on the experiences that had changed them over the past few weeks. "You know," Luke said finally, breaking the silence, "I think Max taught us all something we'd forgotten." Jennifer turned to him, her eyes questioning. "And what's that?" He looked thoughtful, his gaze distant. "That sometimes all a person needs is a bit of hope. And sometimes hope comes from the most unexpected places." Jennifer nodded, her heart full. "You're right. And I think that's what makes this place special. People come here for healing, but sometimes they find so much more." They stayed there for a while, watching as the last of the day faded into night, both of them quietly carrying the memory of Max, the golden retriever who had brought light into their lives, if only for a brief, unforgettable moment. In the days and months that followed, the legacy of Max continued to ripple through St. Luke's. His story became a quiet reminder among the staff, a tale they would share with each other on tough days when the weight of their work felt overwhelming. And in room 405, now known affectionately as Max's room by the staff, patients and families found a renewed sense of hope, inspired by the story of the dog who had changed their hospital forever. For Jennifer, Luke, and especially for Claire and Ethan, Max would always remain a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the unbreakable bond of love. His memory was woven into the fabric of St. Luke's, a lasting testament to the profound impact of a gentle, loyal heart. Months after Max's departure, Room 405 at St. Luke's had become more than just a hospital room. It had evolved into a place of quiet reverence, where both patients and staff would sometimes pause, feeling the memory of something extraordinary. Nurses and doctors often spoke of the Max effect, a subtle but undeniable shift in the air whenever they entered that room. It was as if the golden retriever's gentle spirit lingered, a silent reminder of the healing power of compassion. Ethan's recovery had progressed beautifully, and soon, he was strong enough to be discharged. On his last day at the hospital, Claire took a moment with Jennifer and Luke, both of whom had been there since the beginning. Her gratitude was boundless, etched in the way she hugged each of them, holding on to the people who had cared for her son and who had witnessed the miraculous change Max had brought. "Thank you, both of you," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know this place is supposed to be about medicine and science, but you've given us so much more. You gave us hope when we had none." Jennifer smiled, her own eyes bright with emotion. "It was Max who reminded us of that," she said gently. "Sometimes, hope doesn't come from where we expect." With a final, heartfelt goodbye, Claire and Ethan left St. Luke's, though they knew they would always carry a piece of it with them. Claire had vowed to keep Max's memory alive, to tell Ethan the story of the golden retriever who had come into their lives like an angel when he was old enough to understand. Back inside St. Luke's, Jennifer and Luke stood together, watching the hospital's busy world move around them. They had become closer through this experience, bound not just by their roles, but by a shared understanding of the extraordinary. Max had taught them both invaluable lessons that couldn't be found in textbooks or training programs. "He really changed things, didn't he?" Luke said, glancing at Jennifer with a thoughtful smile. "I never thought a dog could make me question everything I know about healing." Jennifer chuckled softly. "I think he did more than just change us, Luke. He reminded us why we do this in the first place. It's easy to get caught up in protocols and the science, but Max reminded us that, at its core, healing is about connection. It's about caring." The hospital staff, who had all been touched by Max's story, began sharing it with families who were struggling, patients who felt alone, and colleagues who were burned out. It became a tale that was passed along with a quiet reverence, a way to inspire courage and hope during the darkest of times. The hospital even placed a small brass plaque beside the door to room 405, a tribute to Max's impact, in honor of Max, who reminded us all of the healing power of love and compassion. As time went on, St. Luke's became a place where hope felt palpable, where even the most hardened professionals remembered the power of empathy and presence. Jennifer would sometimes visit room 405 in the quiet moments of her shift, taking a deep breath as she reflected on all that Max had taught her. She knew she'd carry his memory with her always, a reminder to approach each patient, each family, with an open heart. Years later, Claire returned to St. Luke's with a healthy, vibrant Ethan by her side. He was 7 years old, full of energy and curiosity, and he had grown up hearing the story of the golden retriever who had helped save his life. Together, they visited room 405, standing in silence as Claire traced her fingers over the small plaque, the memory of Max as vivid as ever. "Mom," Ethan asked, looking up at her with wide, wondering eyes, "do you think Max is still here?" Claire knelt down beside her son, wrapping an arm around him. "In a way, yes. I think he'll always be here, in the hearts of everyone he touched." Jennifer, who had been nearby, noticed Claire and Ethan and quietly approached, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Ethan," she said softly, bending down to his level, "I think Max would be very proud of you. You're a brave boy, just like he was." Ethan beamed, his face lighting up as he held onto the small memory of a dog he had never fully known but whose impact had shaped his life. For Jennifer, Luke, and Claire, and for everyone else touched by Max's story, he had become a symbol of resilience and hope, a quiet hero who had changed them all. And as they left room 405, each of them felt Max's presence, lingering like a warm, comforting light. They knew his spirit would forever be a part of St. Luke's, a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of love and compassion could create the most profound healing of all. Years passed, and St. Luke's continued to evolve, adapting to the ever-changing world of medicine. New technologies were introduced, and medical breakthroughs altered the way patients were treated. But despite all these advancements, Max's story remained a timeless legend within the hospital walls. Staff members, both new and seasoned, were introduced to Max's legacy shortly after joining the team. It became a tradition at St. Luke's that, during orientation, newcomers were taken to room 405 and told the story of Max, the golden retriever who had brought light and hope to those in need. It was a way to instill in them the hospital's values beyond the clinical procedures and protocols: empathy, compassion, and the understanding that healing sometimes required more than medicine. Jennifer, now one of the most respected senior nurses at St. Luke's, had made it her personal mission to keep Max's memory alive. She often found herself recounting the story to young doctors and nurses, reminding them that no matter how scientific their field might be, the heart of their work was about human connection. Max had taught her that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could become the foundation of a miracle. One afternoon, Jennifer was giving a tour to a group of interns. They stopped outside room 405, and she took a deep breath, looking at the familiar brass plaque that bore Max's name. The interns listened quietly as she shared the story, captivated by the way she described the golden retriever who had quietly walked into the hospital, bringing with him an unexplainable sense of calm and healing. Max wasn't just a dog, she explained, her voice filled with emotion. He reminded us all that healing isn't just about what's prescribed or measured. It's about love, presence, and the kind of comfort that words can't always give. The interns were silent for a moment, each of them reflecting on the weight of her words. One of them, a young woman with earnest eyes, spoke up, her voice soft. "So, do you think Max was here for a reason? Like he had a purpose?" Jennifer smiled, nodding. "Yes, I believe he did. And his purpose wasn't just about helping Ethan. He reminded us, all of us, what it means to truly care." The intern nodded, clearly moved. She glanced back at room 405, her expression thoughtful, and Jennifer felt a sense of pride. She knew Max's legacy would continue to inspire new generations of caregivers, shaping the hospital's future long after she was gone. As Jennifer moved on with the tour, she felt a familiar warmth settle over her, a gentle presence that she had come to recognize over the years. It was as if Max's spirit was still there, lingering quietly, watching over them all. Years later, when Jennifer eventually retired, her colleagues and friends gathered to honor her decades of service. The ceremony was filled with heartfelt speeches and laughter, stories of the lives she had touched, the patients she had comforted, and the young staff members she had mentored. Toward the end of the celebration, Luke, now a seasoned doctor himself, stood up to say a few words. "Jennifer," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you've been more than a colleague to us. You've been a guide, a friend, and a teacher. And there's one story you taught me that I'll carry with me forever." He looked toward room 405, his eyes glistening. "The story of Max. You taught us all that healing is more than science. It's about the heart." The audience nodded, and a hush fell over the room as people recalled the golden retriever who had changed their hospital forever. For some, it was a memory. For others, it was a story they had only heard. But for everyone present, Max's legacy was a part of St. Luke's identity, a reminder of the healing power of kindness. After the ceremony, Jennifer walked one last time to room 405. The hospital was quiet, and the hallway was filled with the soft hum of machinery. She placed a hand on the door, closing her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. In her mind, she could see Max, lying beside Ethan, his warm, steady presence filling the room with hope. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for everything." With a final, gentle smile, she turned and walked away, knowing that she was leaving a legacy of her own, one that was forever intertwined with the memory of a golden retriever who had reminded them all of what truly mattered. And as she left St. Luke's for the last time, she felt a quiet, comforting presence by her side, as if Max were walking with her, guiding her into the next chapter of her life. As Jennifer moved into retirement, St. Luke's Hospital continued to flourish, but the essence of Max's story remained embedded in its culture. Staff members, patients, and families alike found comfort in the tale of the golden retriever who had quietly transformed lives with his presence and loyalty. The story evolved into a symbol for the hospital's commitment not only to physical healing but also to the deep emotional and spiritual support that every patient deserved. In the years that followed, a tradition began to form. Families who had experienced long stays or tough battles at St. Luke's would often visit room 405 on the anniversaries of their recoveries or milestones, leaving small tokens of gratitude and notes for others who were still struggling. These tokens, tiny stuffed animals, thank you cards, and even drawings of golden retrievers, piled up over the years, creating a mosaic of hope and resilience in Max's honor. For Jennifer, retirement brought peace, though she missed the steady rhythm of hospital life and the camaraderie of her colleagues. She would often visit St. Luke's on special occasions, especially on the anniversary of Max's arrival. These visits became an annual ritual for her, a way to stay connected to the place she dedicated her life to and to honor the memory of a dog who had shown her the true meaning of healing. One such anniversary, Jennifer found herself sitting in the small hospital chapel, reflecting on the years that had passed. She thought of Ethan, now a teenager, who still kept in touch with her and sent updates about his life. Each letter he sent included a note about Max, and each year he wrote, "I wouldn't be here without Max, and I wouldn't be who I am without you." Jennifer's heart swelled with gratitude. Max's legacy had woven into her life in ways she hadn't expected. She found that he had not only touched the lives of the patients and families at St. Luke's, but had also altered her own path, deepening her compassion, resilience, and sense of purpose. As she rose to leave, she spotted Claire and Ethan entering the hospital lobby. Ethan was nearly as tall as his mother now, his once frail frame now strong and healthy. They shared a warm hug, and Claire looked at Jennifer with tears of gratitude in her eyes, a gratitude that words could never fully express. "Thank you, Jennifer," Claire whispered, her voice breaking, "for everything. For being there when we needed hope, for believing in something bigger than science." Jennifer placed a comforting hand on Claire's shoulder, her own eyes misty. "It was never just me," she replied. "Max brought us together. He reminded us what true healing looks like." As they parted, Jennifer left the hospital with a heart full of peace. She knew she was carrying forward a legacy of love, one that transcended her time at St. Luke's and would live on in each life Max had touched. In the end, Max had taught them all an invaluable lesson: that love, presence, and compassion could bridge the gap between despair and hope. He had left a legacy that would outlast them all, a legacy of healing that didn't just mend the body, but reached into the heart and soul, changing lives forever. And somewhere in the quiet, sacred spaces of St. Luke's, the spirit of a golden retriever named Max remained, a loyal companion to those in need, a symbol of resilience, and a guardian of hope. Years passed, and the hospital underwent renovations, expansions, and new additions to meet the demands of a growing city. But amid the changes, the legacy of Max endured. Room 405 was preserved, with its small plaque as a timeless tribute to the golden retriever who had changed the lives of so many. Staff and families still told his story, each retelling imbued with the same reverence and warmth as the original. One spring day, St. Luke's held a special ceremony to celebrate the hospital's history and honor those who had contributed to its legacy. Former patients, families, and retired staff were invited to attend, and Jennifer, now in her 70s, came as an honored guest. Her years of service, especially her role in keeping Max's memory alive, had made her a beloved figure in the hospital community. The event was held in a newly designed garden on the hospital grounds, a peaceful, green sanctuary dedicated to resilience and healing. As Jennifer walked through the garden, she recognized familiar faces and saw new ones. Patients who had been touched by Max's story, nurses who had started their careers listening to Jennifer's retelling, and families who had found solace in room 405. As the ceremony began, the hospital's director stood to speak, sharing stories of St. Luke's past, honoring the dedication of its staff, and recounting the tale of Max for all those gathered. Then, to Jennifer's surprise, the director called her forward, and she was presented with a bronze statue of Max, his figure forever immortalized in a gentle, sitting posture, his eyes as compassionate and warm as they had been in life. The statue was placed in the center of the garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and benches where families and patients could sit and reflect. Beneath Max's statue, a plaque read, "In memory of Max, who reminded us all that healing is found in compassion, presence, and hope. May his spirit continue to comfort and guide all who walk these paths." Jennifer's hands trembled as she traced the words, and her eyes filled with tears. She remembered every detail of Max's quiet, powerful presence, the way he had simply shown up, bringing peace and healing with him. The garden now stood as a symbol of his legacy, a place where anyone seeking solace could find it, just as she and Ethan and countless others had found it through Max. As the ceremony came to a close, families gathered around the statue, sharing their own stories, placing small tokens, notes, and flowers at its base. Jennifer sat on a nearby bench, watching the next generation find comfort in Max's presence, knowing that his legacy would live on through them. That evening, as the sun set over St. Luke's and cast a warm glow over the garden, Jennifer closed her eyes, feeling a gentle peace wash over her. She knew that Max's story would continue to be told for years to come, and that his spirit would remain forever intertwined with the heart of the hospital. In that quiet moment, she felt a presence beside her, as if Max were there once more, sitting faithfully by her side, his gaze filled with the same quiet understanding. She smiled, her heart full of gratitude and love. And as the light faded, the memory of Max shone brightly, a reminder that compassion and connection could create miracles that would echo through generations. His legacy had become a part of St. Luke's, a timeless promise to those in need that they would never be alone. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and watch this next story. It's incredibly moving.